And thanks, welcome back to the kitchen. We're here at Thoroughbreds. In today's topic, we're going to teach you how to make a seafood chowder. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps to making a seafood chowder, or any chowder for that matter. So let's lay out our ingredients. We have our fresh vegetables and herbs. For our seafood selection, we have local shrimp. We have Hawaiian mahi-mahi that I sous vide. We have 2 pounds of blue swimming crab, 2 pounds of Atlantic salmon. Here we have 4 pounds of our grouper scraps. I saved those from butchering. We have our shrimp shells, that's for the stock. We have 3 gallons of H2O, 4 cups of sherry wine. Any sherry wine will do. For our roux, we have 1 pound of butter, 1 pound of flour. And for our liquids, 2 quarts of heavy cream and 1 gallon of whole milk. Now the first thing we want to do when making a soup or a chowder is begin our stock. You know, as we know, the best soups start with a great stock. A stock is going to enrich flavor, and it's going to give it the backbone your soup needs to really be great. So what we're going to do is we're just going to large chop these onions, cut them in half, cut them into about 6 pieces. We're going to take our celery. After you have the celery rinsed very well, we're just going to cut that into 1.5 inch pieces for our soup. Move that aside. We're going to peel our carrots. And we're going to cut those into 1.5 inch pieces as well. So large chunks. We're going to go ahead and cook our stock for a few hours. So we definitely want to have large enough chunks. That way we don't macerate our vegetables. Now the star of the show, obviously for the stock, is I had saved these lobster heads we got from Maine. We got in some live lobsters and didn't have a utilization for the heads at first. But here we go. Making a stock is a beautiful place for them. So once you have all your mise en place ready for your stock, we're just going to go ahead and load up the pan. So now we got everything ready for our stock. We're just going to load the stock pot with our vegetables and go ahead, make sure they're in there, clean your board with your knife. And once you got that ready, we're going to plunge these lobster heads in there. One at a time, just make sure you left enough room in your stock pot for the vegetables and the lobster heads, and also those shrimp shells we saved from cleaning the shrimp. So just push them down. Once you have everything in there, we're going to add some fresh garlic, 6 to 8 cloves. We're going to add 6 to 8 bay leaves, a little bit of aromatics in there. We're also going to finish it off with Old Bay seasoning, 2 tablespoons, and just give it a stir. That way it's ready for the stove. So now we have our lobster stock on the stove, and we're going to begin the prep work for our soup portion. And we're just going to go ahead and cut the carrots into 1/4 and cut them to a medium dice. We're going to line up our celery. Now I cut them into sticks. It makes it a lot easier to cut these into a medium dice for the soup. And just take your knife, run that all the way down. When you get to the bottom, go ahead, curl in your fingertips so you don't cut them. So we'll get our celery in with the carrots. And that's why it's a good thing to do your stock and get that going ahead of time, because by the time you're ready to make your soup and to start assembling it, it would have been on the stove for enough time. So we're just going to grab this other stack of celery. We're going to medium dice it. Go ahead and make sure, curl in your fingers, make sure you don't cut yourself. And we'll get all of our vegetables diced for our soup while our stock is on the stove. Lastly, we're going to go ahead, get our onions, cut them from side to side, and we're going to give those a small to medium dice as well. You don't want the dice too small, because what we're going to do with the vegetables is give it a saute on the stove. So you don't want all of your vegetables to disappear for your seafood chowder. So go ahead, each onion cut from side to side. Now I can cut pretty fast. If you have to go slower at home, just take your time so you don't cut yourself. Another onion side to side. We'll cut that into a medium dice and just continue on with our soup. And we're almost done with our onions. We're going to cut this side to side, get it medium dice. Last onion. Again, side to side, and with a nice, neat, and clean medium dice. So next we're going to prep our garlic. So what I like to do with the garlic is smash it. Just take it on the board, smash the clove with your knife, sweep it aside, get them all smashed, and that's going to make it so we can easily mince up this garlic for the soup. Now with the garlic, you want to get that pretty small for the saute. That way you can impart as much flavor in the soup as possible. So we're gonna saute that garlic with the vegetables. Just get this chopped up here. Get it nice and small, like I was saying. Mince, 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 mince. And we'll go ahead and we'll get that ready for the soup. We'll get this right in our container. Next, we're gonna do the shallots. We're gonna small dice our shallots, and that's gonna build another layer of flavor for the seafood chowder. So we're gonna take the shallots, cut them in half. Now what you wanna do, I zoomed in for this, you wanna go side to side, then you wanna cut down into strips on top of the shallot, and then what we're gonna do is work our knife through, again, trying to curl our fingers in so you don't cut yourself. And what we end up with is a nice small dice for our shallot, and it's gonna make our soup very flavorful. So I've got the prep work done. I got the shallots, garlic, we have our mirepoix, we have carrots, celery, and onions, medium dice. Garlic is nice and minced, and also our shallots are a nice small dice to start the base of our soup. Now that we have our vegetables prepped, we can go ahead and cook the seafood scraps for our soup. So here's our grouper salmon and local shrimp. We're just gonna put that 450-degree oven for 5 to 6 minutes. Now we have a lot of our prep work done. I've had this lobster stock on the stove for roughly an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, just simmering away with our vegetables, our aromatics. We're gonna cook this for probably another hour. I just like to check it to make sure we're developing enough flavor, and it's looking pretty good. Now we're gonna move on to building the flavor, the fundamental vegetable flavor for our soup. So I've got an even larger stock pot. I've got some oil in the bottom, and we're just gonna start with our finely minced garlic. We're gonna get that in our stock pot. We're gonna saute that for 2 to 3 minutes on a medium heat, and that's gonna be flavor build number 1. Flavor build number 2 is gonna be our shallots. We're gonna get those in, and we'll just continue to cook them with the garlic for about 2 minutes. We wanna sweat the flavors of the garlic and shallots into the oil. And after that, then we'll add the rest of our vegetables and give that a light saute. But it's just important to start with our garlic and shallots just to begin building flavor in this soup. So great soups are built with great flavor levels. So this has been sauteing for about 2 minutes. You can see we're not trying to brown it. We're not trying to overcook it because you get a bitter flavor. We're just trying to cook it perfect. Here is our mirepoix. We're gonna get our carrots, celery, and onion in this large stock pot, and we're gonna saute that for 3 to 4 minutes doing the same process. We just wanna sweat those vegetables, get them in the pan, and get those flavors to start coming out. So just go ahead, grab your rubber spatula, give it a nice stir, and we'll report back in a few minutes once we have our saute ready. So here's another thing. While I was doing the prep work, I went ahead and chopped our red potatoes into pretty much a large dice, and what we want to do is cook them separately from the soup stock. So you have plenty of time, get those potatoes cooked off. These vegetables have been cooking for 3 to 4 minutes, and as you can see, they're nice. The oils have begun to sweat out. It's begun to develop the flavor that we're looking for in our soup. And after that, we're going to go ahead and deglaze with our 4 cups of sherry, and that's going to lift off any flavor that we left on the bottom of that stock pot. So go ahead, deglaze. We're going to give it a stir. We're going to add, at this time, we're going to add our heavy cream, 2 quarts of heavy cream to our stock pot. After that, we're going to add our gallon of whole milk. If you can, use the good milk, the better milk at the store. Whole fat is better for this application. And we're going to give it a stir. We're going to bring it up to a simmer and then begin the next phase. Now, this is our lobster stock. That's been on the stove for roughly 2 hours. And I've cooked much of the flavor out of these lobster heads. We've extracted it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add that to our cream mixture in our soup. So go ahead, set up a fine chinois and a china cap. And it's helpful to take out most of the lobster heads ahead of time. That way you don't slosh boiling liquid on yourself when you're trying to strain it for the soup. That's never fun. So let's get these lobster heads out of the soup and into the strainer. So we're going to go ahead, and you want to use a fine strainer to strain out the fine particles, and also a large strainer to make sure you got the large particles. And just give it a tap on the side. We're going to get all that stock and all that flavor out of there, because that's what we want. Just go ahead and discard your cooked lobster heads and your cooked vegetables. So now that that's done, we have our cream to a simmer with our vegetables, and we're going to add the lobster stock right to our soup. As you can see, it's going to come up nicely. Once the stock is in there, we're going to go ahead, and this is where we're going to refortify the soup. We're going to add another layer of flavor with our dried thyme. We're going to go ahead with our dried oregano. Now that's 2 tablespoons each. So we want to get our herbs in there at this stage of the game. And this is another fortification process. I've got 12 ounces of lobster base that I picked up from the distributor. So basically that's a lobster reduction. So we're adding even more lobster flavor to our soup, and we're going to give that a nice stir. We're going to begin to cook this for about 20 to 30 minutes just to let all the flavors come together in our soup. Next, once we have our soup cooking, we're going to go ahead and make our roux. So that's our 1 pound of butter and 1 pound of flour. So in this application, I like to do a reverse roux process, and because it works a lot better. You don't have to worry about scorching the roux on the bottom of the pan throughout your cooking process, and it's just much more functional when you're talking about a roux thickened soup, especially cream base. So we're going to go ahead, get our butter in the pan. We're going to melt that 1 pound of butter and slowly whisk in our 1 pound of flour. And we're just going to whisk that together in a small pot next to our large stock pot. We're going to cook this for probably around 4 to 5 minutes. Now, you know when your roux is done, when it has a wet sand consistency. If you've ever been to the beach and you've had a wet, bubbly sand under your feet, that's exactly what we want from our roux mixture, is to resemble wet sand. So I'm going to zoom in, and you can see that it's bubbling away. It's getting toasty flavors from the heat, and we're just going to give it a whisk. And if you look at the side of the pan, you can see that it resembles wet sand, and this roux is just about done. So we're going to continue to cook it, continue to whisk it, and get it ready for our soup. So I'm going to cook this for probably 30 more seconds. And like I said, I'll show you a reverse roux process. I learned about it, and now it's the only one I use. So I have my seafood chowder mixture up to a simmer, and this is when we're going to add our roux. And it's so simple, folks. We're just going to add our reverse roux, add it in a small stream, continually stirring. You don't want it to form large clumps in your soup, and it guarantees that you will not have a scorched flavor in your large pot of soup ever. So if you've ever made large cream soups with a roux before, you realize what I'm talking about. You could scorch it. If you do a reverse roux process, it takes that factor out of it, and you don't have to worry about it. So we're going to continue cooking our seafood chowder for about 10 to 15 minutes until that reverse roux thickens, and then we'll go ahead and start adding our seafood and the rest of our flavor components. So this soup has been cooking for about 15 minutes, and as you can see, that flour butter mixture that we made the roux has began to thicken it to a nice creamy texture and creamy consistency. So once you have that done, it's time to start pretty much the final process. We're going to go ahead, we're going to add those cooked potatoes to the soup. So I cooked those till they're pretty soft, but not so soft as they're falling apart. So go ahead, get your potatoes in there, give it a nice stir. Now during this process, go ahead, have your pan on low heat, because you do not want to burn anything on the bottom of your pan. So we've got the potatoes in there. Next, we're going to add our cooked seafood. Now the reason we cooked the seafood ahead of time, lost one, is we don't want to cook that in the soup. We don't want them to break into real small pieces. From my experience with a nice Carolina seafood chowder, the guests are just amazed with these big chunks of fish and just the variety that goes in here. Again, we had the shrimp, we had the Hawaiian mahi-mahi that I sous vide, we had the crab, we had the salmon, and the grouper, and of course our fortified stock with the shrimp shells and the lobster heads. So I got our cooked fish in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and put our sous vide fish in there. And also, the last thing you want to do is add your crab. The crab breaks up the easiest, so you want to add it last as though to keep nice chunks of crab in your soup. So as you can see, it's a pretty full kettle. I'm just stretching the limits of this kettle. So go ahead and stir it up. And we're going to give it a final seasoning. Now this is where you can adjust your salt and pepper. So I'm just going to add a little bit of kosher salt. We're going to add some freshly ground pepper. And this is the ultimate flavor, is we're going to add a 1/4 cup of Cajun seasoning. And that just adds that extra spice level in the soup and just finishes it off beautifully. So go ahead, carefully stir in your seasonings with a large spoon, and be careful as though not to break up your seafood too much. I mean, a little bit is fine, but you don't want it broken up. And this is what we're left with. This is the ultimate seafood chowder. The reason I made this video is our guests love it. Again, thanks for watching Food Fox, Chef John Tapper II, and we'll share more videos.